In this video, we're going to talk about the grid system, and the grid system utilizes flex boxes. So if you're comfortable with the concept of flex boxes, then you're really going to like grid system. That's not like Bootstrap or the CSS grids. The grid system in Bootstrap is like flex boxes, just to keep you confused. So back in the beginning of this video series, we looked at these breakpoints, and we reviewed the fact that, or we learned that there's breakpoints built into Bootstrap. And we learned that Bootstrap is mobile first. And so these are our breakpoints. Anything below 576 is extra small. As we get bigger, this is going to be our breakpoint, and SM is going to indicate that this is going to be small and larger, 576 and higher, then 768 and higher, et cetera, et cetera. So this is our symbols, our words, whatever, for small, medium, large, and XXL. And then this would be the default or the smallest mobile version. All right, so we're going to utilize this with using the grid system and flex boxes. So let's go back up to the very top here. And I'm here under layout and grid if you want to follow along. And this is the very basics of a grid system. So it's this section right here. So we want to always define, you're always going to start off with a div class equals row, which indicates that we're going to define a row coming up. And inside that row, you're going to have divs with a COL, and then whatever you need to attach to that COL. And we'll see that, I'll give you examples of what I mean by that. So just make it easy to start with, you're going to either have just plain old COL, you're going to have COL SM, and then notice the dash, and we'll talk about that in a minute, COL-MD, and on up the line. So here's how this works. I'm going to take this concept, remember row, and a row has to define columns. So we have to define the row, and inside the row, all of the columns that we're going to want to create. And in their example here, they have 3 columns. And notice that they're all equal widths. So this column, there's 3 columns being generated, all of equal widths, simply with this layout. This part is just a container that's giving you those edges. All right, so let's look at what I've created here for us in our example file. Okay, so I've created a row with 12 columns. So here's my row, and then I have 12 divs contained inside of the row, and each column has a class COL. So that's that extra small viewport. And the reason I did 12 is it might seem arbitrary, but Bootstrap is built on the fact that, or the premise that you can have up to, or that your total columns need to equal 12. We need to have 12 columns in total. And so in that example we saw just a moment ago, where we had a div row, and then in here, let me just copy this over so that way you don't have to watch me fat finger. Let's take these 3 columns and we'll talk about what that's doing. All right, so in that example that we pulled right out of Bootstrap, we can see that our columns are taking up 3 equal columns. But notice that the equality is based on 12 columns. So this first column is taking up 4, 4, and 4, because 4 times 3 is 12. So you always have to keep that 12 in your mind as the magic total. All right, so let's try to determine what another breakpoint. Let's see, here we go. So now I'm going to, on the second column, do call, and I'm going to use that SM, and I'm going to define how many columns I want this div to take up in a small or larger viewport. Let's say that this one should take up 6 columns if I'm in a small or larger viewport. So you can see that it just split it up evenly for me. Let me add this with column 2, column 1, and column 3, just to be super obvious. So what is this doing? This is giving us some automatic breakpoints. I showed you earlier this helper, and I've provided the links in Canvas. I'm in Firefox, and Firefox has this Bootstrap Responsive Helper extension, and that's indicating to me that I am in a small or larger viewport, and therefore this div is taking up 6 columns. Notice since I don't have a small or larger viewport defined in column 1 or column 3, their job is to split the difference. So you get 6 and you guys just split whatever is remaining. Well, that's 3 and 3, right? So if I move my cursor or the viewport below this small, so when this goes to extra small, then we're going to see it revert back to the original, which is extra small is 3 equal parts, which is exactly what it's doing here. All right, so let's say instead that we want column, when we're in the column small, that we only want you to take up 2. So you're going to take up 6, you're going to take up 2, and then you're going to take up the remaining. So let's see what happens. We're going to pull this into a small viewport, and that's exactly what's happening. This column is taking up 2, this column is taking up 6, and this one's getting the difference. So maybe in a large viewport, let's give this one in a large viewport, column large, maybe you should take up 8. I don't know, let's just see what happens. So once I hit that large or higher viewport, let's do that. Let's go to a large or higher viewport, medium, large. So let's see what's happening here. All right, what is happening? Looks like a mess, right? So here is, I'm taking up 8. Column 3 is taking up 8. I'm in on a large viewport, that's why it wasn't doing it. There we go. Column 3 is being asked to take up 8. This one's taking up, small or larger is trying to take up 6. Small or larger is trying to take up 2. Well, that doesn't equal 12, does it? That's 8, 9, 10, and then 16. So as a result, the browser couldn't fit couldn't meet these demands. So it pushed this one, it's doing the 8, it's meeting the demands, but not on the same line. So it pushed it on the new line. So we can change that. Let's do a column. Remember, 12 is the magic number, right? Let's do large. Let's do large 2 here, 8, 9, 10. And that should be 12. So now it should fit, right? So small or larger, this one's going to take up 2. Small or larger is going to take up 2. Large or larger is also going to take up 2, and large and larger here is going to take up 8. And then as we get smaller, then we can see the changes take effect, right? So now that we're in a small viewport, this is taking up 2, this is taking up 6, and this is taking up the difference because there's nothing for small, so it's taking up the extra small. Does that make sense? So you can play around with this so you can kind of figure it out, but these breakpoints are built into the grid system. So this is a nice way to lay out columns. Very easy. Now, here's another cool thing. Watch this. Ready? I'm ready. Let's take off the call. Let's take off the extra small viewport for everything below. Okay, so I have a small defined, I have larges defined. Now my numbers are off. So let's do, where are we at? 2, and let's make this 8, 9, 10. Let's make this 6. Let's see what we get. Not what I was banking on. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're in a small viewport. Not quite sure what happened here, so I'm going to have to figure it out, and that's what you have to do when you play around with these. So especially when you kind of do things ad lib on a video. So that one's taking up 2. In the large or greater viewport, which we're not in, we're in a small viewport. That one's taking up 6. Oh, right. Okay. So what is this doing? Well, let me start here, and that wasn't my intention to show you this, but this was my intention. So let me show you this. So if nothing is defined for this and smaller, in my extra small viewport, I have nothing defined. So the default is to stack. So they're stacking on top of each other because I have nothing defined. And as a result, they're stacking. If I had put back call here on each of these, COL, now in the extra small viewport, I'm asking them to equally split up the 3 columns. So now they're splitting them up equally, right? So let's go back to the error that I didn't mean to create, but let's figure out, based on what I just said, what happened. All right. So let's try and figure out what happened here. So we are in the extra small viewport. I have nothing defined, so they are stacking. So let's go to the small viewport. I have this one down here. What's going on? Well, in a small viewport, that's taking up 2 columns. Small, this one's taking up 6. So that looks good. But there's nothing defined for a large, anything below the small, anything below the large. As a result, then, the small is stacking. You see that? So small, small, I have nothing defined, so I'm going to stack. If I had done something, if I added something to the small, SM small, we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we could do 4, for example. So now in the small viewport, since I have something defined for all 3 of those, we're getting that definition. I have nothing defined for anything below the small, so it's going to by default stack. And then of course, large and higher is going to take this because that's small and higher, which is definitely large. Let's go into the large. Go into the large, go into the large, go into the large. There it is. So in the large, column 1 is taking up 2 because this is small and higher. Nothing else is defined for large, so this is going to go all the way through all of the viewports, all of the breakpoints. This one has a small 6, but we have another viewport defined higher, so we're in the large viewport size. So therefore, column 2 is going to take up 2. And then finally, we have column 3 in the in the large, and higher is taking up 6. So I even have 2 left over because that's 6, 2 is 8. So let's just put in column large and tell it to take up the difference. There you go. All right. So if you define something specifically, it'll do that. If you don't define it specifically, it'll take up the slack. I know that was confusing, but the best way to play with this is exactly what I'm doing. Hopefully I didn't confuse the issue. But main thing is you have to have rows. Inside the row, you have column definitions. Every single one of these divs have to have some kind of column definition. You're always defining your calls with this and larger in mind. So it'll take, as we saw earlier, this one took this flowed all the way into large, extra large, extra large, because this is this or larger, unless we assign it something else larger. If you don't give it a number, it's going to take up all of the remaining distance that it can find, whatever is allocated that's left over. So in this case, what was left over this was 6, that was 8. So that's 9, 10, 11, 12. That allowed 4 to be left over, and it took up the difference. So I hope this was helpful. Grid systems are super cool, and they're very flexible, and they make our web page flow very easily with media queries we don't have to write.